Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and move forward with our webinar. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we're very pleased this afternoon to be presenting for you a webinar on ODOT's LPA Project Bill of Materials. We have for you with us today Chase Wells, who works in the construction section, and Chase is going to provide the presentation for you as well as do a screen sharing of the actual Project Bill of Materials to show you how it can work. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. On your screen, if you do not see a chat pod in the bottom left-hand corner, please look for a circle with a thought bubble in it and click on that, and then your chat pod should open on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. This is where we're going to ask everyone to please put your questions during the webinar presentation itself. We do have everyone currently muted in order to keep down the background noise to a minimum. And we would ask you enter questions you have there. I'll be reading those off to Chase, and we'll get responses for you. We do want this to be a very interactive webinar, so please ask whatever questions you have. I will tell you that I am attempting to record the webinar, so don't let that dampen your enthusiasm for asking questions. Ask away, because it's just going to enhance the webinar itself. But know that if the recording is successful, we'll be sending out a link to everybody, so you'll be able to hopefully watch it again in the future if you have questions or just need a refresher on how the P-BOM works. So with that, Chase, are you ready to take it away?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Thanks.
Awesome. And thank you, Victoria. I know Victoria is working remotely right now, and so she's going definitely above her public duty. So thank you, Victoria, for that and allowing me the opportunity to go over the LPA Project Bill of Materials. So with that, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chase Wells. I work in the Division of Construction Management, Office of Alternative Project Delivery here in Central Office. My job duties include construction partnering, statewide pre-bid coordination, implementing design-build projects and other alternative contracting methods, coordinating value engineering change proposals greater than $50,000 statewide, assisting the department in e-construction initiatives, and act as the construction liaison for the Office of Local Programs, a position that provides me personally with a lot of satisfaction because I feel like I make the largest impact. And so today, we're going to discuss the general material management along with the purpose and overview of the Project Bill of Materials, which will include a mock run-through. The goal of this presentation is to provide you, as the LPA or construction consultant end user, with a comfort, familiarity, and level of expectation when it comes to tracking materials on federally aided construction projects. This afternoon's agenda will include the following: Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, Ohio Stewardship and Oversight Agreement highlights, regulations, various material acceptance methods, job mix formulas, JMFs, ODOT LET Project Bill of Material versus what a local LET Project Bill of Materials looks like, a live Project Bill of Materials demonstration, and then of course any questions, and please feel free to submit those at any time. So to generalize, this presentation will discuss the what, why, and how of the Project Bill of Materials. So to get where we're going, we must first know where we've been and understand how we got here in the first place. I attended Ohio University. My bachelor's degree was in civil engineering. With that little blurb there, I minored in philosophy. Just kidding. I'm going to pretend like you all are laughing, but no, it's important. I think for any ODOTers on the line, you might appreciate this slide right here, the CMS. This used to be our construction management system before our current system that we work out of right now, ASHTO Site Manager. So going back a little bit in time, in 2010, I was hired full-time with the department. I was fresh out of college. I was working as a project engineer with a great staff on the Nelsonville Bypass. And part of being a project engineer, obviously, is learning the office side of things, how to execute change orders, how to track, daily work reports, how to pay for estimates, and so forth. And so I was eager to learn what the system was going to be, and lo and behold, I was presented with what you see on your screen, this construction management system. Right out of the gate, my first thought, look, this thing's outdated, it's pixelated, You didn't even use a mouse, which struck me as odd. You controlled everything using the function keys at the top of your keyboard. And so I was a little lost, or there was a learning curve to it. But this is how the project bill of materials became known as the PBOM, the PBOM. And so before I go any further, I want to clear this up a little bit, because people start to laugh a little bit when you hear the term PBOM. And for most people I've talked to, they think it's something along the side of a highway or something like that. But really, it has everything to do with this slide right here. PBOM, and what that stands for, as I said, the project bill of materials. Working in CMS, it had a bunch of former codes. Obviously, the PBOM was one. It also had PBOOK, that stood for Paybook. There was a DMAT, that stood for Delivered Materials. DDWAP, that stood for Diary, Weather, and Pay. LIQID, that stood for Liquid Materials. And there was just a handful of these codes, but once you learn these codes, it helps you navigate the system. And actually, for the time that it was in place, it was very useful. It was developed in 1993 and existed almost 2 decades through 2011, when eventually ODOT transitioned over to AASHTO Site Manager. For me, I think that's a pretty remarkable run for a system that was built entirely internal. But pay close attention here to some of these column headers, say, for example, conversion factors, the inspected quantity, the required quantity. Those are terms I think you'll see later if you're familiar with the project bill of materials. So, as an LPA, you are recipients of federal funds. What you may or may not know are the agreements and obligations that take place beforehand between FHWA and ODOT that allows you to be recipients. Section 106 of Title 23 United States Code requires that the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, and their state enter into an agreement documenting the extent to which the state assumes the responsibilities of FHWA. The Stewardship and Oversight Agreement formalizes these delegated responsibilities and agreements to address how the federal aid highway program will be administered in each state. As I'm sure you can guess, the materials management oversight and compliance is delegated down to ODOT through the Stewardship and Oversight Agreement. And the Stewardship and Oversight Agreement gets updated every couple years. I know here in the near future, our executive management staff is going to be sitting down with our Ohio FHWA division and updating our latest 2017 agreement. So what this slide is trying to depict is the relationship between state DOTs and how they have the respective FHWA divisions. And because of this relationship exists the LPA program. Through the Stewardship and Oversight Agreement, the state DOT may permit local public agencies to carry out the state DOT's assumed responsibilities. But the state DOT is always responsible and accountable for LPA compliance with all applicable federal laws and requirements. It's truly a daunting task. This fiscal year alone, ODOT is expected to top $400 million in LPA projects, and that's second in our history only to 2010, when the Obama administration pushed out the ERA projects. Combine that with the fact that our overall capital budget's hovering somewhere between $1.4 and $1.5 billion, our LPA program is a big part of our capital program. It's $400 million. That's a lot of money that the department has to oversee of federal funds. It's awful that at any one time, ODOT has approximately 200 active local projects. And so what that means from a programmatic level is trying to manage 200 different ways of managing a construction project. It's a situation where if the LPA fails, ODOT fails in the eyes of FHWA. Therefore, it's beneficial if ODOT can provide tools to help the LPA succeed. Hence, this Project Bill of Materials webinar. So in order to receive federal funds on ODOT-led projects, one thing ODOT must prove to FHWA is that we have sufficient mechanisms in place to test, sample, track, certify material. This is governed by the Code of Federal Regulations 637. It's a specification that does not define the process, but rather the end goal. It's up to the different state DOTs to determine their own materials management process and then receive approval from FHWA. ODOT's Office of Materials Management goes through an accreditation process every couple years with both AASHTO Resource and CCRL, the ASTM Cement and Concrete Reference Laboratory. The Office of Materials Management has maintained this accreditation since 1995. This plays a large part in why ODOT's materials management process is so vast and expansive. To keep it simple, FHWA wants to ensure quality products are used in every facet of a construction project, and it's the department's responsibility to meet those expectations. Thus, ODOT needs to ensure quality products are used on local lead projects and tracked accordingly, knowing full well there is a premium for said materials. This is the standard and expectation when accepting federal funds. So what's the purpose of the project bill of material? As stated in the LPA Construction Manual Procedures, before payment is made to the contractor, sufficient measurements, calculations, material certs, etc. must be made to ensure close conformity to the plans and specifications. At all times, we need to ensure that the material accepted is greater than or equal to the materials required. So how do we accept the materials? I'll be the first to admit it. ODOT's material acceptance method is not intuitive. There is a little bit of a learning curve to it. And the goal of this project bill of materials is to help make that learning curve not so steep. So what are the acceptance methods? They're defined by QPL, or the Qualified Product List, Approved List, TE24, QCQA, Certified Test Data, Small Quantity, etc. And we'll go into those definitions shortly. Also, what the project bill of materials does is defines what's primary material and what's component material. A good example of this is a conduit. Your primary material is going to be, say, your reinforced concrete pipe, your aluminum pipe, your corrugated polyethylene, and so forth. What your component material is going to be is, say, for example, joint filler or the sand that goes into the backfill and bedding. Another thing the project bill of materials does are conversion factors. You need to convert the material units to the work units that are being paid. An example of this would be curb. The material coming to your construction project is going to come in concrete, cubic yards of concrete, but what you're going to do is pay for that curb in linear feet, and so there needs to be that cross section. There needs to be that conversion factor. And so think of it this way: cross sections of curb will vary between, say, type 2 curb, type 2A, type 3, etc., and all require different amounts of concrete. And so what we have to ensure is the material accepted is greater than the material required, and paying for such by linear feet. Qualified Products List. The QPL identifies materials and manufacturers whose materials are approved for use on ODOT projects without further documentation or testing. These are materials that have historically been accepted for their performance history. The producing industry has a history of furnishing these quality materials, and in the grand scheme of things, are small dollars in the department's overall material purchase. OMM Laboratory does not possess the equipment or capabilities to routinely test for acceptance. So where do you find materials on ODOT's QPL list? Let's just go out to the web and I can show you how to get there. So if you're on the Ohio Department of Transportation's homepage, you'll be able to get there in 2 clicks. You hover over Divisions, slide down to Construction Management. I lied, 3 clicks. And you scroll down here on the left side and you'll see Materials Management right here. And when you click Materials Management and scroll down, one of the first links you're going to see is the QPL, the Qualified Products List. And here's just a screenshot of what we just saw. So when you click on that link, you'll see this page. And let's say, for example, we want to look at bridge paint. When you click on that link and say you want to go to CMS 7008.02, organic zinc epoxy urethane, you'll see this screen. And what's important to look for on this sheet is the material name, the producer supplier, and the brand name. Those are the type of information you're looking for from the contractor when he has materials brought to the project to ensure that that material is indeed on the qualified products list. If you see something from the contractor on your project site that's not listed on the proper QPL list, chances are the state hasn't approved it and it shouldn't be incorporated into the project. I think a best management practice is to actually print the QPL and say highlight the material being used and place it in the work folder on your LPA project. This QPL list is active, and so at any one time, Office of Materials Management can either add or delete some of the producer suppliers and their brands. And so there could be a chance where you have a material that may be accepted at the beginning of a project, but then later in the project, for whatever reason, OMM decides to take that manufacturer down. So what it does is just validate your decision making at the time. Approved list. It's an internet-based list created to provide ODOT contractors and field personnel easy access to information needed to construct and manage a project. Proof of these files are, say, a manufacturer's stamp or an imprint, label information. And I think what's important here is, I've seen this in the past and I would deem this a best practice, as this material comes to the project, either rip or detach that identification and stick it in your project folder. That's just another step to ensure that, yes, the material that came to the project was indeed approved, and you can, obviously ensure that in the off chance of an audit. Also, what you'd be looking for maybe is a letter of conformance showing the manufacturer, some other form of documentation showing the manufacturer, grade, or brand sufficient for positive identification of the material, supplier markings, and such. Again, you'd go back out to the Office of Materials Management website, and right under QPL, where we just were, you'll find the approved list. For example, let's say you click on that list and you want to go to Geo Textile Fabrics. You click that, and again, you're going to see something much like the QPL. You're going to see the producer, you're going to see the brand, the fabric type, in this example. So those are the type of things that you're looking for, that material that's on project, and making sure that it conforms to this list. Next up, TE24s. This is an Office of Materials Management numbering system, or a form number, that is used by external producer suppliers to ship materials. The best way for me to describe a TE24 is that ODOT certifies a producer supplier and their bulk inventory. Each time that producer supplier ships their inventory material to a project site, ODOT's virtual warehouse tracks and deducts that quantity from their approved inventory. Once a producer supplier's inventory is depleted, they must get recertified by the state. That is why it's important to collect TE24s on LPA projects, because the same material standards apply on ODOT-led projects as they do on local-led. For ODOT-led projects, we can track electronically to what project a producer supplier sent their material based on established project reference items. For local-led projects, that's not the case. ODOT does not house a database that has the exact numbering of reference work items, and so often TE24s are sent to generic LPA project names like county route sections, city-county names, something like that. It is sometimes difficult to know exactly what item of work the material is associated with. This is why it's important to collect a paper copy of the TE24, because it may be the only source documentation for the material. I also hear this. I haven't heard it in a while, but it used to be pretty common. Suppliers would state, Mr. LPA or Mr. Construction Consultant, we can't create TE24s without an ODOT project number. And the fact of the matter, this is untrue. But why would a producer supplier state such? It's so that if they do not deduct from their certified inventory, they can extend the life of their inventory. So if they don't assign their material to an LPA project, that just stays in their inventory. So in a way, it's advantageous for them to may not be the most truthful with where their material is going. So it's important for us to collect that TE24 on the project site and ensure that that material or that producer supplier is shipping their materials. Some other acceptance methods are certified test data. Examples of this would be H-piles, cast pile points, shear studs, cast in place reinforced concrete piles, and so forth. It's not necessarily a certificate or compliance. The data is what the data is. We just need to verify that it meets our specifications. Small quantity, ODOT CMS 106.03. Before accepting a material of small quantity, the project engineers shall evaluate whether the items meet the requirements, obviously, of 106.03. Do not exceed 10% of the total quantity required for the specification construction item, and is not a critical structural or highway safety item. The example I'd like to give here would be temporary concrete road for MOT. It's not going to be in place for the life of the project, and so it doesn't need to be sent away for 28-day breaks or something like that. But it is important that the durability lasts, and I would recommend that you still take your air slump yield to make sure that that concrete's still quality and should at least serve its purpose during the construction phase or its temporary use. And last, job control, sample taken to pay for work. What you're going to have here is, say, your concrete cylinders. That's the best way to describe job control. But what's nice is the LPA project bill of materials lists the material acceptance methods so that you do not have to spend time figuring out such or remembering. That was a common complaint that I've heard when we were building this thing, is like, Chase, I don't know whether an item falls under QPL approved list, if it's certified test data, if I can small quantity it and stuff. And so hopefully by completing this project bill of materials, it will help assist you in determining the proper acceptance method. Thing I'd like to touch on here is job mix formulas, how to ensure your asphalt or concrete mix is approved and from a certified producer supplier. What I have here is an example concrete ticket. If you look over here, middle left, the JMF, job mix formula number, is C300102-1A. If you want to see if that job mix formula is approved to be used on an LPA project, you simply go to the Division of Construction Management's website, which we were previously on, to go to the Materials Management. Simply go up to the CMRS portal, click that link. Again, you'll see this page. Scroll up to Contractors Reports and go down to Active Portland Cement Concrete JMFs. Or if you're looking for asphalt, simply click the link above. But for this example, we'll stick with concrete. Here, once you click on the link, it will ask you to either select the JMF or you'll have to hand input if it's an asphalt JMF. But again, we were able to find C300102-1A. That was the JMF listed on the concrete ticket. And up should pop the producer supplier, which means it's been approved. If you find a JMF that does not pull up, obviously it stands a chance of not being approved or expired. And in that case, it's important to either get with your district construction monitor, their district testing engineer, or either call myself. And I can talk with Dan Miller, who runs our concrete section down in Materials Management. I had this example last summer, or I had this instance where a consultant was working on a local lead project, and the concrete was certified at the beginning. And it was approaching July 4th weekend. Of course, some work was shut down. But when that consultant came back and took additional concrete tests, kudos to them. They, again, checked to make sure that that JMF was approved, and it expired over the 4th of July weekend. And they called and they said, Chase, what am I supposed to do? This concrete's no longer approved. And I said, well, let's pump the brakes. We were able to work with Dan Miller and Office of Materials Management, the concrete section, and he's familiar with the producer supplier, and within a day he had them back on the approved list. But it was just a good example of constantly checking to make sure that the concrete coming to the projects have been approved by the state. One thing I'd like to mention about asphalt JMFs is the conversion factor. Often we'll see 2 tons per cubic yards. That's a safe default number. We typically see that, say, on 304 aggregate base or 301 base for asphalt. But once you start to get into the intermediate course, the surface course, that 2 is often not the proper conversion factor. If you see here, for this active JMF, it's actually 1.929. And what's important here is when we get into the mock run of the project bill of materials, our system actually defaults to 2, but we have the option to override, and in this case we would use, say, a 1.929 conversion factor. So this screen, this is essentially how the sausage is made, if you will. But what is important for you as the end user is to understand that ODOT is not asking you to do anything more than our own project engineers on our ODOT-led projects. And for that, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these next few slides. The screenshot is from ODOT's Site Manager SQL database. If you recall, Site Manager is ODOT's current construction management program, where we track daily work reports, change orders estimates, liquidated damages, materials, etc. This is where all the components of the project bill of materials can be queried on. What is important about this slide is simply the visual marriage between ODOT's item master and the standard bill of materials. An example of an ODOT item from the item master is 614E10000, a unique 9-digit identifier corresponding to CMS specifications. With each 9-digit identifier are the associated material items. The combination of ODOT item master and associated materials of each work item creates the standard bill of materials, the SBOM, if you will, back in the CMS days. The standard bill of materials is the database that houses all materials which could be incorporated into a project. When I say that, I'm not talking about the brand or the manufacturers. I'm referring to 304, the 57 stone, the sand, the different conduit types, fabrics, concrete classes, etc. The list goes on. ODOT's item master contains 7,494 different work items, and then when you incorporate the materials to those associated work items, you actually come up with 26,565 unique combinations. I think it's worth noting that the item master is updated fairly regularly, actually the last being Monday, March 4th. And therefore it's not a quarterly schedule like our CMS specifications, or it's not in line with our CMS book publications. The item master can get updated at any time. So don't be alarmed if you don't see a 2019 project bill of materials on the LPA website just yet, even though one will be coming in the future. In order for the LPA project bill of materials spreadsheet to operate, the user will need the 9-digit codes from the item master. I'm going to assume most of you know what that means, but I do want to show you an example of ODOT's item master. For that, we'll go back out to the internet, and I had one pulled up here. This is what I'm talking about with ODOT's item master. These are the 7,494 different potential work items that could be incorporated on a construction project. And you'll see these unique 9-digit identifiers. Here's 611, everyone's favorite specification. 611E26001 identifies a 72-inch conduit type A as per plan. It's that specific. And then, as I said, when you start incorporating materials with these item codes, that's what creates the standard bill of materials. So we'll jump back to the presentation here. And I actually had a screenshot, but I wanted to go out to the web and show you a better example because this is just the initial home screen, and it's got things such as liability insurance and dispute resolution boards, which don't actually have materials. So again, this is just a visual depiction of how ODOT's project bill of materials is created by tying the ODOT item to material codes. This is the same database that our ODOT Site Manager uses, and it's the same database that I used to create the LPA project bill of materials. And once the report runs, this, I know it's probably hard to read, but this is what it spits out. This is a screenshot of an ODOT-led project bill of materials in Site Manager. This is what our ODOT project engineers have to deal with on a biweekly basis when we generate estimates. With every estimate, we must incorporate the project bill of materials, and we have to list out where we're deficient on materials and why. And that gets incorporated with every estimate that we do. But pay attention here. This should look familiar. I talked previously on primary and component materials. If you can follow my cursor, you'll see the conversion factors. You'll see the placed quantities. You'll even see the shortage or overage. And that's what we tried to replicate with our project bill of materials on the local side. Here's a standard bill of material screenshot. As I said earlier, the department is not asking the locals to do more than what our own project engineers are doing on our ODOT construction projects. So with that, it's probably time to jump into a mock run with the project bill of materials. What you'll need are, for your project-specific instance, is the item codes, the 9-digit identifiers that we just previously talked about, bid quantities, and 5 minutes of your time. When I say 5 minutes of your time, I'm giving you a 3-minute break, because if you have that information, it won't take long at all. That being said, hopefully it's electronic. Again, here, what I'm talking about, the 9-digit identifiers, because what that does is create the link between work items and material codes. So with that, escape the PowerPoint here.
While you're doing that, Chase, I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions while Chase is doing his presentation, please feel free to enter those in the chat pod on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you joined us a little late and you don't have a chat pod on your screen, look for the circle with a thought bubble in it, and that thought bubble, when you click on it, will show the chat pod then on the left-hand side of your screen. So there we go, Chase. Thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. So to get to the website link that contains the LPA project bill of materials, again, we'll start on the home page of ODOT. We'll scroll over here to divisions, hover, and down on the third item is construction management. Click that. Scroll here on your left, and you will see LPA construction contract admin. Click this link, and this will take you to a page that I maintain. After you're here, scroll down to the bottom right of the page. You'll see a section called materials, and the very first link is project bill of materials setup, and you click that link. And what will pop up is this spreadsheet. And make sure, first of all, that your macros are enabled, because there is a macro tied to the spreadsheet. You can do that in the settings. We don't necessarily need to touch on this, but if you do get lost and you don't have access to this webinar, the very first tab lists the instructions on how to create the project bill of materials, and here you'll see ensure your macros are enabled for the spreadsheet. But let's just say we know what we're doing. And so, for example, as I said, right here, this first column is where your ODOT work items go, your item codes, the 9-digit identifiers. This second column, this green, you don't need to do anything here. You'll see this trim function. Every now and then, when you're inputting these item codes, there might be a space, an invisible space, if you will, at the end of the item code. And that can prevent the spreadsheet from running. And so by having this trim function, it makes sure that the field is limited to just the 9 characters. Reference number, I would recommend that you tie a reference number to all your different work items, but it's not necessary for the project bill of materials to run. And then in this last category, you need your bid quantity. With that, you'll be able to produce a project bill of materials in no time. And as I said, hopefully you have that information electronically. If you're the local, if you're the construction consultant, get back with the designer and see if they can't produce that for you. That should be made. So I'm going to live in a perfect world here. I've got an example project pulled up. I grabbed an ODOT project. And so I have here electronically the ODOT item codes. What I'm going to do here is simply copy and paste this column. So Control Shift down and Control C, copy that column and go here and paste. the item codes. You see as I paste the item codes, the green column B here, populates, and it just trims any invisible spaces that might be tied to the item codes. Another important thing here is to ensure that these columns are text fields. Some examples that when you carry over an item code with this E, Excel will recognize it as scientific notation. That E actually stands for English. A while back, the Department of Transportation was toying with the idea of maintaining with our English units, or maybe moving to a metric system. And so you would see item codes with an E or an M. Ultimately, we didn't go to the metric system. We're still with English units, but that's what that E stands for. But be careful, because Excel at times can recognize it as scientific notation. But once you get this cleaned up, bring in your reference numbers. Control-Shift down, Control-C. I've highlighted the column and copied it, and getting ready to paste it into the spreadsheet. And then last, the bit quantities. Control-Shift down, Control-C, copy that column, and paste them into the spreadsheet. And what we have here is all the information needed to create a project bill of materials. Really didn't take much time at all. The next step is, quite frankly, the last step to get it to run. You click this button here, and it says to run the project bill of materials. And what that's doing is actually running a macro in the background. And you'll see here in a second, it takes a few seconds for it to populate. But I want to make mention here, because I even had this phone call this week, you only need to click this button once. Once you click it, it grabs all that information from the previous page and produces a project bill of materials. Once it brings in all the items and quantities and so forth, the materials, you'll be able to track it and edit it accordingly. So to keep that in mind, you only need to run this once. Now I'm going to kind of describe what this macro is doing. It's not important that you know, but there are curious minds, and I do get asked the question from time to time, what is going on? And so when you click that macro, that button that runs the project bill of materials, what it's actually doing is coming to this last tab. And this is the standard bill of materials. This is, let's see, 26,578 lines of data. But what the macro is doing is, say, for example, look at this item code, 100E00300. It's railroad insurance bond. If you scroll over here, you're going to notice a Y. What it's doing is actually looking up, there's a VLOOKUP function here and an if statement, that if this item code matches an item code that you previously inputted on this tab back here, which I believe it's just down the list here toward the bottom. Yes, 100E00300 match. It puts a Y. And when you run the macro, it's simply just filtering on the Y. And so it takes that long list of 26,000 lines of data and shrinks it down to 198. But we don't need to do that, because the macro is going to do it for us. Perfect. So I hope I didn't confuse you there, but I just wanted to show you exactly what's behind the curtains. So let's go ahead and run the project bill of materials. Click the link. And our project bill of materials produced. You're going to have a lot of lines of data still. And I know if you're not familiar with such, it could look a little bit overwhelming. But what I like to tell people to do, you can only work on one item at a time. And so it's best to just go ahead and fill. And so let's run through a couple examples. We'll start off easy. We'll go to reference 33. which is the surface course. And this should look familiar to what the ODOT project bill of materials did, the ODOT led project bill of materials, I should say. You're going to start seeing the same header titles, primary and component material. The primary material for reference 33 is going to be 441 type 1 surface. You're also going to see a component material, your hot applied asphalt joint adhesive. So that's going to be the material sprayed down on your longitudinal joint. You also see here a substitute material. Say, for example, the contractor elected to go with a performance graded asphalt with a PG of 6422. I'm going to guess they don't use that, but they have the option. But for this example, let's say they don't. Feel free to go ahead and delete this item. And so for reference 33, you're only left with the primary surface material and the component hot applied asphalt joint. We'll scroll over here. And for the project bill of materials, the only thing you're going to need to adjust or enter in data are these gray columns. So, for example, let's say the contractor is doing asphalt. You collect all the tickets on the job, and you total them up. Of course, the asphalt's going to come to the project in tons, and you tally it up, and you see 1,980 tons. But here, you're actually placing what you're paying for. So in column M, you're placing the quantity of material coming to the project. In column N, you're placing what you're paying for. Let's just say we're going to pay for planned quantity, 1,000 cubic yards, which is what's here. You place that, and all of a sudden this shows up in red. It says -20. What that means is you're actually 20 tons short of being able to pay for 1,000 yards. So, in reality, you have to make sure that the material accepted is greater than or equal to the material required. So, by that logic, really, even though planned quantity is 1,000, we should have only paid 990 cubic yards in order to get this to 0. But I hope you're paying attention, because this is all assuming that that conversion factor is 2. And I want you to know as the end user that this conversion factor can be adjusted. Sometimes it's as simple as grabbing the correct conversion factor off the JMF. Sometimes there's a little more engineering behind it. But as we said, I believe the example we used in the PowerPoint was 1.929. That was the conversion factor. So let's override the 2 and put that in there. And wouldn't you know it, we're actually 70.29 tons to the good. So that's good. I want to show this too about the hot applied asphalt joint adhesive. What you'll see here is there's no conversion factor. That happens from time to time on this project bill of materials. It's not to be alarmed. Really, when it comes down to it, a lot of times it will read 0 because, quite frankly, it's just hard to calculate. An example of this would be a component material pipe. You're going to be paying for sand. But in order, because you pay for pipe in linear feet, but the sand's going to be coming to the project in tons. But that's assuming that you know the exact diameter of the pipe and you know what the exact trench is going to be and the level of bedding and backfill and all that kind of stuff. And to be quite frank, that's pretty hard. And so you're most likely going to see 0. What is more important, because we don't ask our ODOT project engineers to come up with that conversion factor, what's more important is that hot applied asphalt joint is coming to the project in pounds, is certified. So say it comes on a TE24. That's more important as a component material, is ensuring that it's coming from an approved source. So that's a good example of asphalt. Let's go ahead and do another example. we'll scroll down here and we'll do some thermoplastic paint, another popular work item on a project. So what we have here is a whole host of primaries. We have thermoplastic granular white. We have the glass beads, which is a component material to the thermoplastic paint. We have yellow, and we also have some other spec materials. Again, you only need one primary, so let's go ahead and get rid of these. And let's say the contractor's spraying white paint, so we also don't need the yellow. Go ahead and clean up your project bill of materials. Go ahead and delete the row. Keep this project bill of materials active. So we see here that thermoplastic paint is supposed to come certified, which also means TE24. I should have mentioned this previously. The acceptance definitions are also in this spreadsheet. Simply go here, you'll see cert, you'll have a definition for a TE24. But what we're looking for here is a quantity of 3.74 mile. But of course the paint's going to come in pounds. Let's say, for example, we go out and we measure the contractor stripes 3.50 miles. That's what we measured, and that's what we plan to pay. But what we need to do is make sure that indeed the contractor has enough material to cover that. This actually gives you a little bit of hint of what you should be seeing on that TE24. So let's say 47,385 pounds. We see we're right on the dot. Maybe they gave us a little more. Maybe they gave us 47,400. That's great. What that's telling us is we're actually 15 pounds to the good. If it's in green, that means the material accepted is greater than or equal to the material required. And the same can be done for the glass beads. They should come on the same TE24. Again, we're paying for 13.5 mile. This spreadsheet's telling us then we should see 4,276.8 pounds on the TE24. You're probably not going to see it down to the decimal, so we need to make sure that that TE24.
Sorry, yeah. We've got a question in the chat pod. I got so excited to see it. It says, how often is this form updated? I noticed that the tab states 2016 standard bill of materials. Is this bill of materials up to date?
It actually is. I shouldn't have tied the CMS data to it because that standard bill of materials, or I'm sorry, the item master gets updated pretty frequently. It's not on a set schedule. Estimating maintains the item master. They update it sometimes weekly, sometimes it's every couple weeks. And so this thing always fluctuates. Now with an ODOT project being in Site Manager, that information gets updated instantaneously. For this spreadsheet, I can only update it so often. I don't have the time to update it, say, every day. And so there will always be some items, for example, that may not be on this spreadsheet. I dated it 2016. The reason why is dating back to our specifications dealing with conduit. As we migrated to the 2013 CMS, that's when we were all used to that 603, 604 method-based specification for installing pipe. When we moved to 611, it was a performance-based specification, kind of took the industry by storm a little bit, if you will, but we allowed the locals that grace period. And so it was important when we created this project bill of materials, as some LPA projects were still under the method-based 603, 604 specification. Some newer projects were under the 611 specification. And so I started calling or naming these project bill of materials based on that specification alone. And now we're out of that grace period. I don't know of any local LET projects that are still under 603, 604 specifications. So I really, I don't need to call it by the CMS, but at the same time, you know, in January of this year, ODOT just released our 2019 CMS, and I need to update the project bill of materials again. But in doing so, I wouldn't look those 26,000 lines of data that we just looked at previously, it probably is not going to fluctuate by no more than, say, 50 to 100. The fact of the matter is it doesn't move that much. But no, that's a great question. And we'll touch on that a little bit later.
There's another question, Chase, too, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it off to you. It says, from your previous example, the hot applied with conversion of 0.00, is it okay then that we don't enter any quantity in that row as long as we have a TE-24 for hot applied, or just leave the row blank?
Yes, either or is fine. The biggest thing is making sure that hot applied adhesive is an accepted material. That is by far the most important thing. I don't expect the locals to go back in and update that conversion factor because we don't ask our project engineers to do that. So,
got another one.
Yes.
Looking at the asphalt line during the course of a 2-year-long project that may have asphalt paid monthly on 12 different payments, how are we to track these overages, shortages for each separate payment? Seems difficult to track a quantity that may be spread out over a long period of time and or multiple payments.
That's fair enough. It is something that you have to update continuously. I can't make that any easier. There's two different ways about going about the project bill of materials and the way you want to update it. I've seen some locals or consultants simply update, or I shouldn't say update, but save the spreadsheet monthly. So as they produce an invoice, before that invoice goes out, they're making sure that all the materials up to that point are approved. And so if the project's an 8-month-long project, you could expect to see roughly 8 saved different project bill of materials as the project progresses. But really, the most important thing is that at the very end of the project, you can prove that you've got materials accepted, as I said, are greater than or equal to the materials approved. And so, it's not uncommon to run asphalt tickets, to just keep them in a file, and tally them at the end of a project. But what you want to ensure is that you can't pay for more than what you have tickets for. And this spreadsheet is geared to help you do that along the way. Also, ensuring that it's coming from an approved source. But you can either do it either. I would recommend updating it monthly and making sure that all your materials are approved before the invoice goes out. That's going to save you potentially down the road from having a shortfall of materials. That's what we ask our project engineers to do on a bi-weekly basis, mind you. So I don't know how to make that easier. You're right. An asphalt project, you're going to have tickets coming in constantly, but it's something that needs to be stayed up on. Good question.
That's it for questions right now.
Okay. We'll just jump back here and finish this example. So you want to see on that T24 at least 4,277 pounds of glass beads. That T24 has at least that number. In this example, you're 0.2 pounds to the good. You're good to go from that point. So that's a couple examples of how to run through the project bill of materials. We'll jump back here to the PowerPoint because I know we've only got a handful of minutes left.
There was a comment that came in from Patrick. It says additional lines may be added to the P-BOM for each entry.
Yes, that's true. And that's what I'm going to touch on here right now is there are some imperfections with this project bill of materials. It's not perfect, unfortunately. One of the biggest things that the spreadsheet does not do is repeat work item codes. And what I mean by that is, say your project has multiple bridge structures. A typical plan is going to have the rebar called out in different sections for all the bridges in that set of plans. And so you're going to see that exact same item code repeated for bridge 1, bridge 2, bridge 3, and so forth. Unfortunately, the spreadsheet, with it having the if statement VLOOKUP function, ingrained for it to run that macro, it only returns the first item code that it hits. So if you've got 4 repeating item codes, it's only going to return the first reference item. So what you as the end user will have to do is just manually add a line for that, and you can simply copy the original data from the first reference item of the material and repeat that. So always feel free. It's a dynamic spreadsheet. It's meant to be dynamic. One thing I forgot to mention as well, change orders. Your quantities are constantly going to fluctuate up and down throughout the life of the project. Feel free on that spreadsheet to just update the quantity. It's still going to tell you the amount of material you need based on whether it was the original quantity or the quantity after the change order. The genesis of this spreadsheet spawned from when I first took over the LPA construction liaison for the Office of Local Programs. There was a project bill of materials, but what the user had to do was grab that 9-digit item code, put it into this small dialog box, and say item code, comma, space, item code, comma, space. And if you had 100 work items, you had to do that for 100. And if you messed something up, if you missed a space, missed a comma, it wouldn't run. It was a pain in the butt. If you were lucky enough and got it to run, it was a PDF, so it was a static snapshot of the project. It didn't have the ability to update with change orders. And so I can confidently say this is much better than what we had, but it's not perfect. I touched too on the scientific notation. That's an issue. Make sure that that is listed as a text field, that first column when you first input the item codes. The other thing is it does not include local data. I don't have the ability to know all the work items from the city of Dayton to the city of Columbus to Medina County and so forth. All I can have is the data that's available to me, and that's the data on our ODOT-led projects. So ODOT's not in the business of utility work. Locals typically are, and so we won't see all the water lines, etc., gas lines that a local might have. Feel free to add those. That's not a problem. The most important thing is that you're tracking quantities and that you're ensuring that the material accepted is greater than or equal to the material required. As I mentioned, the static item master, that was the example of the PDF I just gave you. The spreadsheet is meant to be dynamic, and so you can update it as much and as often as you want. And I also touched too on the absent incorrect conversion factors. If the conversion factor is not there, truth be told, we're not asking our project engineers on ODOT-led projects to update it. It just is what it is. A lot of the times, as I said, is you're trying to calculate, say, porous backfill, the square yards of filter fabric that's supposed to go there. Well, if every retaining wall or abutment was the exact same dimensions, yeah, we could calculate what that's supposed to be. But the thing is that stuff varies from project to project. And so it's hard sometimes to nail down the correct conversion factor for every specific project. And so sometimes you have to use a little bit of engineering judgment to ensure that you've got the material covered. So in summary, it's a project tool. What we just discussed today is to help make your life easier when you're running an LPA construction project. This spreadsheet, it's important to note, it's not mandated. You do not have to use this to run a spreadsheet, or I'm sorry, to manage materials. But what you have to have is some type of system for tracking and certifying materials. Simply collecting tickets, that does not meet the standard or expectation that we have for our materials management program. If that's what we did on our ODOT-led projects, the feds wouldn't give us a penny. And so as stewards and overseeing the money that's filtered down to the locals, we have to ensure that that's upheld. And
Chase, there's a question that came in the chat pod.
Yep.
It says, are the bills of material created and items loaded per project by the owner? And I'll also let you know we only have like a minute left.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes. I've talked with the Office of Local Programs. We haven't mandated it yet, but it's important that the designer has those 9-digit item codes. I will see local let plans from time to time that only has the 3-digit item code. say 614. It will identify all the maintenance of traffic items as 614. What I encourage you to do as a local is have your designer come up and nail down those 9-digit item codes. It's really not that much work. Chances are they're already doing it anyway. They're just shorthanding that 3-digit code. So yes, you need the 9-digit code for your system, the spreadsheet to work. Push your designer to do such. And lastly, I don't want to promote Infotech's Appia, but what's important about that particular piece of program is it's a web-based system. It's from Infotech, which produces our site manager that we use on our O.Lab projects, but it's web-based. And what Appia has done in the last year is approach me and work with our project bill of materials. They've taken our spreadsheet, they've taken our data, and actually inputted that into their system. And so if you adopt Appia, which there is a cost to it, don't get me wrong, but if you purchase it, and a lot of locals are in the state of Ohio, it comes with ODOT's project bill of materials, which is, that's great, and it's a useful tool, and you can track things electronically on your phone as opposed to a computer and hand entering it into a spreadsheet. So with that, I know I'm a few minutes over. I'll wrap things up, but hopefully today was informative for you all, and I'll put my information right there. Please don't hesitate to call me. I enjoy working with locals and helping you guys out.
Well, we really appreciate you doing the webinar today, and hopefully everyone has found some value in the information they've received. I did put Chase's contact information also in the chat pod, and I also put a link to our webinars page where we have future upcoming webinars in case you might be interested and what's next that we'll be offering. So thanks again, Chase. I appreciate it, and if this recording was successful, I will definitely send a link out to everyone. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Victoria.